Hi, it's Nicole. Today I'd like to show you every book in my Oxford World's Classics collection. They can be divided nicely into 4 groups: works from Jane Austen era, Victorian era, Modernism, and world literature. I'll give you a brief summary of each book. I'll also share with you my personal stories with them. Knowing how many unread books I have, it's interesting to look through this collection and realize I have read most of them. The main reason is that I bought each one with a specific purpose in mind. Let's get to the books and I'll explain. So, Jane Austen era. Most of my Jane Austen books came to me for Jane Austen July. If you are not familiar, each July a big part of the booktube community read all things Jane Austen together. It's already June now, so I expect the announcement videos will come out soon. First one. This is a collection of Austen's lesser known and unfinished works, including Lady Susan, The Watsons, and Sanditon. Lady Susan is an epistolary novella following the manipulative and charming Lady Susan Vernon as she schemes to secure advantageous marriages for herself and her daughter. This was written about the same time as Sense and Sensibility, and we know Sense and Sensibility started off as a epistolary novel. It's interesting to read this and imagine what Sense and Sensibility would have been like. The Watsons is an unfinished novel about Emma Wharton, a young woman raised by wealthy relatives who now returns to her struggling family, where she has 3 unmarried sisters and no mother. Imagine the Pride and Prejudice without Mrs. Bennet. I can't decide if it's better or worse. Last one, Sanditon. Sanditon was started the year before Austen died. It's an unfinished novel. It stops at chapter 11. That introduces Charlotte Haywood, who visits the seaside town of Sanditon, a developing resort. My notes say Charlotte cares very much about behaving correctly, and she's an observer to the characters and the plot. Both qualities make her read like Fanny Price. In this collection, there are also the opinions of Mansfield Park and Emma that Austen collected from family, friends, and wider circles. It's interesting to read people's reactions and preferences at the time. A lot of them say Mansfield Park and Emma are good, but they preferred Pride and Prejudice or Sense and Sensibility. There are also some poems by Jane Austen in here. Selected letters. This is a collection of Austen's letters to her friends and family, and of course, mostly to her sister Cassandra. It offers a fascinating glimpse into Austen's personal history, relationships, Regency society, but most of all, her unfiltered wicked wit and personality. It's particularly good to read alongside a biography. Belinda by Maria Edgeworth is about a young woman, Belinda Portman, navigating London society. One of the prompts of Jane Austen July is to read Austen's contemporaries. I think it's a brilliant idea. Jane Austen read and enjoyed Belinda. She mentioned it in Northanger Abbey. I haven't read this, but in my research I found that apparently it discusses interracial marriage, which I haven't come across in literature from this period before. Let me know what you think if you have read this. The Grasmere and Alfoxden Journals by Dorothy Wordsworth is a collection of diary entries offering an intimate look into the daily life, landscape, and literary inspirations of Dorothy Wordsworth, her brother William Wordsworth, and their friends, including Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Written in the Lake District, obviously my favorite place on earth. The journals capture the beauty of nature and the simple yet profound moments that shaped romantic movement. She reads Shakespeare one after another, she does gardening and plucks wildflowers and herbs on her walks to bring home. There is an encounter with a beggar right after a description of a playful bird. On my sticky note, it says, I feel I want a quiet life like theirs, and their life is pretty boring, alternatively. I wonder if Dorothy would be very surprised if she knew her private diaries are published for all to read by the Victorians. Most of my Victorian and early 20th century novels appeared in my life around the same time, and that is the COVID years. And I got them for the purpose of my DIY English education. Me doing an English degree at the moment is largely the result of my DIY English education and this YouTube channel, and it all came out of lockdown. Maybe we should spend a separate video talking about that one day. I set the goal of reading 10 Victorian novels during the first year of my DIY English education, and what I have here are more or less the titles I chose then. Middlemarch by George Eliot. Look at the size of it. Set in a provincial English town, it follows multiple interwoven stories, primarily that of Dorothy Brooke, an idealistic young woman who marries an older scholar only to find herself trapped in an unfulfilling marriage. I personally find Dorothy and Ladislaw a bit annoying. Lydgate's frustration with his wife is a lot more realistically frustrating, and I love Mary Garth and her thread of the story. It shows me something I started to see more and clearer as I get older. Those who are inside a marriage want to get out, and those who are outside desperately try to get in. It's like the scene in The Lion King. You know that scene? I put Middlemarch off for a long while because I was intimidated by its fame and its size. And its title, What is Middlemarch? In the end, it's just the name of the place where the stories happen. But it's Middlemarch, one of the most well-known Victorian novels of all time. I had to read it. When I finally got to it, I read the first lines. It says, Miss Brooke had that kind of beauty which seems to be thrown into relief by poor dress. Her hand and wrist were so finely formed that she could wear sleeves not less bare of style than those in which the Blessed Virgin appeared to Italian painters, and her profile as well as her stature and bearing seemed to gain the more dignity from her plain garments, which by the side of provincial fashion gave her the impressiveness of a fine quotation from the Bible or from one of our older poets in a paragraph of today's newspaper. I immediately thought, I'm going to be okay. I can deal with young women and their dress senses. It gets more complicated than that, obviously, but don't be intimidated. The Meal on the Floss is also good if you'd like to try something a bit smaller by George Eliot. I did a review of The Meal on the Floss here. Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. Bathsheba Everdeen, a proud and independent woman, inherits a farm and attracts 3 very different suitors. The steadfast shepherd Gabriel Oak, the wealthy farm owner Mr. Boldwood, and the reckless soldier Sergeant Choi. It's a journey of finding true love and finding her true self. The reading experience was ruined by the excellent 2015 film adaptation. The plot, the characterization, and the spirit of the story are rendered so faithfully that there is little point reading the novel, really. But I persevered till the end, just to check that the film hasn't missed a beat. Far from the Madding Crowd has a happy ending, which is quite untypical of Hardy. If you'd like to try something more tragic, more Hardy-like, I read The Mayor of Casterbridge with Victober one year and thoroughly enjoyed the misery. And, of course, the Bronte sisters. Got them here. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and often Jane grows up in a harsh environment before becoming a governess at Thornfield Hall, where she falls in love with the brooding Mr. Rochester. However, secrets from his past threaten their happiness, driving Jane away and leading her on a journey of self-respect, independence, and moral integrity. As the most well-known Victorian novels, I thought I knew it. However, just to prove the point that there's always more to learn, the most striking thing I read about Jane Eyre recently is from Steering the Craft, a writing guide by Le Guin. She says, it's in the chapter of repetition. Repetition, of course, isn't limited to words or phrases. Structural repetition is the similarity of the events in a story, happenings that echo one another. It involves the whole of a story or novel. For a marvelous example of it, you might reread the first chapter of Jane Eyre and think about the rest of the book as you do. Bracket, if you haven't read Jane Eyre, do, then you can think about it for the rest of your life. The first chapter is full of foreshadowing, the introduction of images and themes that will return throughout the book. For example, we meet Jane as a shy, silent, self-respecting child, the outsider in an unloving household, who takes refuge in books, pictures, and nature. An older boy who bullies and abuses her goes too far at last, and she turns on him and fights back. Nobody takes her part, and she's locked in an upstairs room that she's been told is haunted. Well, grown-up Jane is going to be the shy outsider in another household, where she'll stand up against Mr. Rochester's bullying, finally be forced to rebel, and find herself utterly alone. And there's an upstairs room in that house, which is truly haunted. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. A dark and passionate tale of love and revenge in the wild and desolate Yorkshire moors. It follows the torturous relationship between Heathcliff and Catherine Earnshaw. Their obsessive love leads to destruction, affecting not only themselves but the next generation of the family. The way Emily Bronte names her characters can be confusing for unsuspecting newbies like I was. I haven't read 100 Years of Solitude, but the way the same names pop up over generations within a family reminds me of that. If you like drawing charts to keep track of characters' relationships, this is a good novel to practice that. Thomas Hardy is quite famous for making use of violent weather. Emily Bronte can easily compete with him in that category. If there's such an award category called the best novel for awful weather, I'd nominate these two authors. The plot and the characters are like the weather. They are not very pleasant. Overall, I find Wuthering Heights an anxiety-inducing book. I was anxious about everybody. Would they live? Would they die? Would they turn out good or bad? Why would everybody torture each other in the name of love? As a first-time reader, I really couldn't fathom and found it quite dreadful. But among this list we've seen so far, this is the one I would like to revisit most. And it's not very big. Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte, a semi-autobiographical novel about a young governess, Agnes Grey, who struggles with the cruelty and entitlement of the wealthy families she serves. It gives unrealistic depiction of the hardships faced by governesses in Victorian England. I watched Underdog, the other Bronte by the National Theatre. It's a retelling of the Bronte sisters' legends. It's quite interesting watching and imagining the sisters' rivalry as they write and publish their novels. All three works were published in 1847. Jane Eyre in October, Wuthering Heights in November, Agnes Grey in December. Imagine that. Next, Dickens. The Victorian era is such a bountiful age. It took me a year just to read one famous work from each of the most famous writers. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, Pip, an orphan, unexpectedly comes into wealth from a mysterious benefactor and moves to London to become a gentleman. He had to learn the hard way, poor kid, the true meaning of gentleman, and that true worth is not found in social status, but in kindness and integrity. He has one of the most atmospheric and chilling openings. I prefer A Tale of Two Cities as a whole. I did a review here, but this has a much more gripping opening. I give Magwitch the literary award of Best Victorian Swimmer. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Dorian Gray, a handsome young man, wishes to stay young and beautiful forever, while his portrait ages instead of him. As he indulges in a life of excess and immorality, the portrait reflects his corruption, becoming more ugly with each sin he commits. It's the shortest Victorian novel in this collection. It's an interesting fact that this tragic novel is the most famous work of Oscar Wilde, even though he mostly wrote comedy plays. North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. Margaret Hale moves from the rural south of England to the industrial north, where she witnesses the struggles between mill owners and workers. As she navigates class tensions and personal challenges, she finds herself drawn to the proud and principled mill owner John Thornton. Margaret Hale and John Thornton have a hint of the Pride and Prejudice thing going on. They do not see eye to eye at the beginning and slowly grow to understand and respect each other. Among these Victorian authors, Gaskell was completely new to me. I might have not read Middlemarch, but I knew about it. I had no idea who Gaskell was. It's interesting reading observations of the north of England from the southerner's point of view and realizing how true some of the stereotypes are even today. The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. There are constant debates about if Henry James should be included in the English curriculum because he's both British and American. But I decided to include him as well as Catherine Mansfield, I'll talk about her later, who is from New Zealand. Isabel Archer, a young American, travels to Europe and unexpectedly inherits a fortune, like Pip in Great Expectations. Determined to maintain her independence, she rejects several suitors, but is ultimately manipulated into an unhappy marriage with the controlling Gilbert Osmond. As she struggles with betrayal and loss of personal freedom, Isabel must decide whether to escape her circumstances or uphold her sense of duty. Isabel Archer rejects several suitors and makes wrong choices like Bathsheba Everdeen in Far From the Madding Crowd. As a result, the story feels a bit like Middlemarch in a way that it discusses what you do when you are trapped in an unhappy marriage. I read somewhere that Henry James uses indirect free indirect speech, like Jane Austen does, so the readers can feel up close with the protagonist, but still be able to criticize her. It's something to pay attention to if you plan to read this. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. They follow Alice, as she falls into a fantastical world and meets weird characters doing illogical things. It reads like a dream in the sense that it's nonsense and it puts me to sleep. After reading an essay called A Defense of Nonsense by G.K. Chesterton, I can't help but agree with him that Lewis Carroll is too calculated in his nonsense, especially when reading side by side with Edward Lear, who is naturally whimsical and silly. What do you think? Overall, no matter how thick the book is and how complicated the plots interweave, a Victorian story is ultimately a story in the traditional sense. Maybe not Alice in Wonderland. It might be heavy in themes or deep in discussions of human nature, but the writing style itself is most of the time familiar. Which is not the case when we come to the modernist novels. I haven't done any research on this, but I can feel and guess how modernism came about, my theory. After decades of perfect palaces of elaborate plots and fully fleshed out characters, writers at the beginning of the 20th century had enough and wanted to do something drastically different. Take Virginia Woolf, for example. Her novels are all tiny in comparison, and the stories are in pieces. The long Victorian sentences, where a single one can go on for a whole page, they are now in fragments. A friend who is new to the style asked me, what are all the semicolons, commas, and dashes about? That's exactly the sentiment. The sentence fragments mirror thoughts floating through one's mind before they are fully formed, edited, and perfected. To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, a modernist novel that explores the inner thoughts and emotions of the Ramsay family and their guests during visits to their summer home on the Isle of Skye. This was my first Virginia Woolf. A Room of One's Own and 3 Guineas by Virginia Woolf. Again, these 2 long essays explore the societal and financial barriers that have historically prevented women from achieving literary and intellectual independence. Woolf argues that women need financial security and personal space to create art, and she critiques patriarchal structures that contribute to war and inequality. It's one of the few non-fiction works in this collection and includes the famous "if Shakespeare had an equally talented sister" argument. Selected essays by Virginia Woolf includes 30 shorter essays in 4 categories: reading and writing, life writing, women and fiction, and looking on. She's one of the greatest essayists of the 20th century. I want to write nonfiction like her. Curious, intelligent, and bold in thinking, and beautiful in style. A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. A semi-autobiographical novel following Stephen Dedalus as he grows up in Ireland, struggling with religion, family expectations, and artistic ambition. Through stream of consciousness narration, Joyce traces Stephen's journey toward self-discovery and his decision to reject societal constraints in favor of a life dedicated to art. It's not long, but I found this very, very hard, even harder than Ulysses. Ulysses by James Joyce, a groundbreaking modernist novel that follows Leopold Bloom and Stephen Dedalus over the course of a single day, 16th of June, 1904. Bloom's Day is coming up in Dublin. It uses stream of consciousness narration, fragmented and non-linear. It's structured to parallel Homer's Odyssey. If you've read Odyssey, it's fun to play spot the allusions. Each chapter is written in a different style. It's unusual. It must have been very unusual if you have just lived through the Victorian age and were used to the styles of Dickens and Bronte's, and you came across this for the first time. This must have been shocking. Though I imagine James Joyce had fun writing it, you can't self-impose a writing project this big without having some fun yourself in the process. I shared a few tips from my reading experience in this video, just in case you would like to give it a go. Selected Stories by Catherine Mansfield is a collection of 33 short works of fiction. I am not very good at reading short stories. I often cannot get the meaning of them. They read like riddles to me. I wonder if you ever had that feeling. The best thing I read to address this problem is a book called A Swim in a Pond in the Rain by George Saunders. It combines literary analysis with reflections on writing and life. It taught me how to read short stories using a few Russian works as examples. Which leads nicely to our next group of books. World literature. Here they are, slightly upside down. I bought both The Death of Ivan Ilyich and Other Stories by Leo Tolstoy and About Love and Other Stories by Anton Chekhov off the back of reading George Saunders. 5 Plays, also by Chekhov. This collection includes Ivanov, The Seagull, Uncle Vanya, 3 Sisters and The Cherry Orchard, 5 of his most celebrated plays. The next 2 books remind me that I was into ancient Greek stuff for a spell. Theogony and Works and Days by Hesiod. They are 2 foundational works of ancient Greek literature. Theogony traces the genealogy of the gods, detailing their origins and conflicts. Works and Days offers practical advice on agriculture, morality and justice, reflecting Hesiod's vision of human life and divine influence. The Library of Greek Mythology by Apollodorus. A comprehensive guide to Greek mythology. This work systematically presents the genealogies and adventures of gods and heroes, including the Trojan War. Judging by my notes, that's the only section I read. Metamorphosis by Ovid. I have Metamorphosis in this translation by A.E.D. Melville. I also have 2 more translations by now, and I couldn't get to the end of any of them. It's a sweeping epic poem that spans 15 books recounting myth of transformation from the creation of the world to the deification of Julius Caesar. Lastly, a birthday present, Faust Part 1 by Goethe. It's a play which follows Dr. Faust, a scholar who makes a pact with the devil in pursuit of knowledge and pleasure. Overall, I love the Oxford World's Classics. They have excellent introductions and notes. I usually have no problem with their front cover designs. The physical books are pleasant to handle. They open nice and flat to write in the margin. I never had any issue with pages falling out, even it's this big. Even though they look like they are glued together, rather than stitched. Never had any problem. Among all the books, they stand in a row on the same spot on my shelves. Only one discolored. It's Dorothy. Can see this bit? And I'll put another next to it. It's less red. That's the only one. One exception, I mentioned this in my 6 editions of Shakespeare video, is that I don't like their Shakespeare, which are printed differently. Can you see? See, it's a lot whiter and stiffer. Because if you look at the bottom, they are printed differently like this. which makes it harder to open flat. It's, yeah, this might have changed. This one was reissued in 2008, but just so you're aware when you go to bookshops next time. Apart from that, I love them. And best of all, they are usually among the most affordable on the market. So that's all for today. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.